The headlights caught nothing but asphalt and darkness for the last 3 hours. Just empty desert highway and the occasional semi blowing past hard enough to shake the Civic. My eyes burned. Had that gritty feeling you get when you've been awake too long and your body's forgotten how to blink properly. 16 hours I'd been driving, stopped once for gas in some nowhere town in Arizona, paid with the last 20 on my debit card that hadn't bounced, ate a stale protein bar from the glove box, pissed behind the building because the bathroom was locked and I wasn't about to ask the attendant for a key, wasn't about to have any conversation that might stick in someone's memory. The Honda wasn't mine. Well, legally it was for another 72 hours. Then it belonged to the bank again, or the repo company, or whoever the hell actually owned things when you stopped being able to pay for them. Vincent from Cascade Recovery had been real clear on the phone. 3 days to return the vehicle voluntarily, or they'd come get it. And if they had to come get it, there'd be additional fees I definitely couldn't pay. So I'd loaded what fit in 2 garbage bags and started driving west. The Motel 6 sign materialized out of the black around 2:30 in the morning, that particular shade of orangey red they all have, bright enough to hurt after all that darkness. Barstow, California. I'd passed the city limits marker maybe 10 minutes back. Didn't know a damn thing about Barstow except it existed and it wasn't Phoenix. Phoenix had my maxed credit cards. Phoenix had my landlord and the eviction notice. Phoenix had Jenna's number blocked in my phone and my number blocked in hers. Phoenix had the collection agencies and the disconnected utilities and the job I'd walked out of when my supervisor started asking questions about why I looked so tired all the time, why I couldn't focus, whether everything was all right at home. Everything was not all right at home. Everything had stopped being all right at home about 6 months ago, and I'd spent those months watching it all collapse in slow motion while I tried to figure out which fire to put out first. Turned out you can't put out fires when you're drowning. I pulled into the motel parking lot. Gravel crunched under the tires. The place looked exactly how you'd expect a Motel 6 off a desert highway to look. Long, single-story building, maybe 20 rooms. Cars scattered in front of about half of them. Exterior doors painted that institutional teal color. Flickering light over the office entrance. The engine ticked when I shut it off. I sat there for a minute, hands still on the wheel. My left wrist ached. It always ached now. 5 permanent bruises in the exact shape of fingers, faded to a yellow-green that never quite disappeared. I rolled my sleeve down. $43 in cash left to my name. I'd counted it at the last rest stop. Mix of 5s and 1s, all of them crumpled from being shoved in my pocket. Felt like play money. Felt like the kind of amount that couldn't possibly matter, couldn't buy anything real, but it could buy one night in a bed that wasn't the Honda's back seat. I grabbed one of the garbage bags and headed for the office. The door chimed when I pushed through. Old mechanical bell, the kind that's half rusted. Inside smelled stale. Old coffee and cleaning chemicals and something underneath that might have been mildew. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that 60-cycle buzz you stop noticing after a while. Guy behind the counter didn't look up. He was heavy-set, 50s maybe, thinning gray hair combed over a bald spot. Just sat there staring at a small television positioned under the desk, some late-night infomercial playing with the volume low. I approached the counter. Waited. He still didn't look up. "Need a room," I said. His eyes stayed on the television for another few seconds. Then he moved, slow and mechanical, reaching under the counter for a registration card. Slid it across to me along with a pen that was chained to the desk. I filled it out. Made up a license plate number. Couldn't remember the real one, and wasn't about to walk back outside to check. Put my real name because I was too tired to remember a fake one. Left the phone number blank. Started counting out the bills. Smoothed each one before I set it down. 28, 33, 38, 43. The pile looked pathetic spread across the counter. "How much for one night?" 42, he said. Monotone. Barely a voice at all, just sound. I slid the money toward him. He counted it with thick fingers, lips moving slightly. Took his time. Finally swept it off the counter and into some drawer I couldn't see. Reached behind him to a pegboard and grabbed a key. Actual metal key on a plastic diamond-shaped tag. Room 119 stamped on both sides. He set it on the counter between us. "Checkout's 11, he said. I took the key. The plastic was worn smooth, warm from his hand. "Thanks." He was already looking back at the television. The bell chimed behind me on the way out. Cold air hit my face. That desert cold that comes after sundown when there's nothing to hold the heat. My breath fogged. Room 119 was at the far end of the building. I walked past the other rooms, catching glimpses through gaps in curtains. Television light flickering, someone coughing. Normal motel sounds. The key stuck in the lock. I had to jiggle it, turn it part way, pull it back out, try again. Third attempt, it finally turned. The door swung inward, and I hit the light switch. Standard motel room. I'd seen 100 of them. Single queen bed with a comforter, that same generic pattern they all have. Maroon and teal geometric shapes. Nightstand on one side. Dresser with a television bolted to the top. Small round table by the window with 2 chairs. Door on the far wall that'd be the bathroom. But everything had that layer of neglect on it. The kind of wear that comes from years of not quite enough maintenance. Carpet was beige, or had been, now stained in patterns that suggested old water damage and things I didn't want to think about. Walls were supposed to be white but had gone yellow-gray. Curtains hung uneven, fabric thin enough to see the parking lot lights through them. I dropped my garbage bag by the door and locked the deadbolt, chain too. The bed creaked when I sat on it. Springs complained. Mattress had that sunken quality in the middle, the shape of 10,000 other bodies who'd slept here before me. God, I was tired. That bone-deep exhaustion where your whole body feels heavy and your thoughts move through sludge. 16 hours driving. Before that, 20 hours packing and dodging phone calls and trying to figure out what the hell to do with a life that had completely fallen apart. I should sleep. Should just fall backward and let unconsciousness take over. But my brain wouldn't stop moving. Kept cycling through the same loops. How much gas money did I have left? Where was I going tomorrow? What was I going to do when the 72 hours ran out? Whether I could find day labor somewhere, make enough to eat, maybe rent a weekly room in some even cheaper place than this. Whether any of it mattered. I rubbed my eyes. They felt like sandpaper. The nightstand had a drawer, a reading lamp with a stained shade, and 2 items positioned side by side on the surface, a Gideon Bible in the standard dark blue cover and a laminated card. I'd seen the Bible before. Every motel had them. Never opened one in my life and wasn't about to start now. The card, though, that was different. It was positioned deliberately, not tossed there or left behind by the last guest. Centered on the nightstand exactly between the lamp and the Bible, like someone had measured. Laminated in that thick plastic that's gone slightly yellow, maybe 4 inches by 6 inches, white cardstock underneath. I figured it was checkout information, maybe house rules. Don't smoke in the room. Don't steal the towels. Here's the Wi-Fi password. I picked it up. The plastic was rigid in my hands, edges sharp enough to notice. The overhead light reflected off the surface made it hard to read for a second until I tilted it. Text in faded typewriter font. Not printed. Actually typed on an old typewriter, you could see where some letters hit darker than others, where the E was slightly raised and the O had a chip in it. 6 lines, each one numbered. I read them. Room 119. Regulations 1. Keep the bathroom door closed between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. 2. If the television turns on by itself, you must watch it until the program ends. 3. Never answer knocking. That comes in sets of 3. Wait for the 4th knock. 4. When using the ice machine, count to 60 before taking your ice. 5. If you hear your name called, only respond if the voice comes from inside the room. 6. Do not look directly at the bathroom mirror after 3 a.m. I read them again, then a third time. My tired brain tried to process what I was looking at. Some kind of joke. Had to be. Someone's idea of being funny, typing up fake rules to creep out the guests. But the card was old. The typewriter font had faded to that brown-gray color old ink gets. The lamination had started separating at one corner. This wasn't something someone made yesterday as a prank. I turned it over. Nothing on the back except a small stamp in the lower right corner. Management. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I could hear the hum of the mini fridge under the TV, the distant sound of a semi on the highway, my own breathing. I set the card back down on the nightstand, exactly where it had been before. I laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound came out harsh and ugly in the stale air of room 119, more bitter than amused. Some bored employee with too much time between check-ins had typed up these rules on what? A typewriter they'd found in a storage closet. Laminated the whole thing to make it look official, aged, important. Probably got a real kick out of imagining travelers reading this nonsense, getting spooked in the dead hours of the morning. Made sense, really. Working night shift at a Barstow Motel, watching the same stretch of parking lot for 8 hours while an infomercial cycled through its promises. You'd need something to keep yourself entertained. I'd done worse jobs with more mind-numbing hours. At the packaging warehouse in Phoenix, we used to move the new guy's lunch to different lockers just to watch him search. Stupid shit to break up the monotony. This was the same thing, just someone's idea of a joke. I picked up the card from the nightstand and tossed it onto the bed. It landed face down, the red management stamp visible against the faded maroon comforter. My shoulders ached from 16 hours gripping the steering wheel. My neck had that deep throb that meant I'd been tensing without realizing it, and my eyes felt like someone had rubbed sand under the lids. I needed a shower, needed to stand under hot water until my brain stopped running through the calculations. 72 hours until repossession, $1 in my pocket. No plan beyond making it through tomorrow. The bathroom door stuck slightly when I pushed it open. Cheap wood, swollen from years of steam and poor ventilation. I flicked the light switch and fluorescent tubes buzzed to life overhead, casting that particular shade of institutional white that made everything look slightly corpse-colored. I left the door wide open behind me. Deliberate choice, conscious defiance of the first rule on that ridiculous card. Keep bathroom door closed between 2 and 4 a.m. Yeah, sure. I'd close it when I damn well felt the urge for privacy, not because some laminated piece of employee humor told me to. Small rebellion, maybe. Pointless, but I'd spent the last 6 months watching my life get dictated by other people's rules and timelines. Collection agencies, landlords, Jenna's lawyer, Vincent from Cascade Recovery, with his professionally sympathetic voice explaining the repossession process. This door was staying open. The shower knobs required some wrestling. Hot water came out rust-colored for the first few seconds, standard for old pipes, then cleared to something approaching clean. I stripped off my clothes, left them in a pile by the toilet, and stepped under the spray. Surprisingly decent pressure. Better than I'd expected from a $42 room in Barstow. The water hit hot and steady against my neck, my shoulders, running down my back in streams that actually had some force behind them. I stood there with my eyes closed, hands braced against the tile wall, and let it work on the knots that had formed between my shoulder blades. Steam filled the small bathroom. I could feel my muscles beginning to unknot. That painful loosening when tension you've been carrying for hours finally starts to release. The heat soaked into my skin. My breathing slowed. For maybe 30 seconds, I wasn't thinking about the Honda in the parking lot, or the $1 in my pocket, or the fact that I had no idea what I was doing tomorrow after checkout at 11 a.m. Just water, just heat, just the white noise of the spray hitting tile. I don't know how long I stood there. long enough for the mirror to fog completely, long enough for my fingertips to prune, long enough that when I finally shut off the water and stepped out onto the threadbare bath mat, the air felt cold against my skin despite the lingering steam. I grabbed the towel from the rack, thin, rough, institutional white, and started drying off. That's when I noticed the television was on. I could see it through the open bathroom door, the screen glowing in the dark room beyond. Blue-gray light flickered across the wall, the ceiling, casting moving shadows that didn't correspond to anything I could identify. Static filled the screen, that particular quality of visual noise that used to be everywhere before everything went digital. Gray and white chaos, dancing pixels. The sound turned down low enough that I could just barely hear its hiss underneath the drip of the shower head behind me. I hadn't turned it on, hadn't touched the remote, hadn't even looked at the television since entering the room, except to register its presence bolted to the dresser. Old wiring, I thought. Faulty power button. These places had equipment that had been running since the 90s, earlier maybe. Stuff turned on by itself when the circuits got worn down, when moisture got into the connections. I'd seen it happen at the warehouse. Machines starting up without anyone near the switch. Conveyor belts lurching to life during lunch breaks. Just faulty wiring. I kept toweling off, rubbing the thin fabric across my chest, my arms, but my eyes stayed on the screen, because there were shapes in the static. Suggestions of forms that almost resolved into something recognizable before dissolving back into the chaos of gray snow. Could have been faces, could have been figures, could have been nothing. Just my exhausted brain trying to find patterns in randomness, the same way people saw animals in clouds or Jesus on toast. But they moved with purpose. The shapes shifted and flowed through the static with an intentionality that made my skin prickle despite the bathroom's residual warmth. I wrapped the towel around my waist and stepped toward the bathroom door, toward the bedroom, toward the television. My hand reached out automatically toward where I assumed the remote would be. Nightstand, probably, or the dresser near the TV itself. Just turn it off. Simple solution. Power button, screen goes dark, problem solved. My fingers were maybe 6 inches from the dresser when the static shifted. My face stared back at me from the screen. Not a reflection. The angle was wrong. I was standing to the side of the television, and reflections don't work that way, don't appear on screens showing static. And this face, my face, wasn't moving with me. I froze mid-reach, and the face in the static stayed in motion, its eyes tracking, its head turning slightly, as if trying to get a better view of something, as if trying to get a better view of me. From somewhere else. Watching me from somewhere that wasn't this room, wasn't this motel, wasn't anywhere I could place or identify. The rule surfaced in my mind unbidden. Watch television if it turns on by itself until program ends. Don't turn it off. Just watch until it stops. My hand hung in the air between my body and the dresser. My pulse hammered in my throat. The face in the static, my face, continued its slow movements, studying me from wherever it existed. I pulled my hand back. Slowly, deliberately. Like moving too fast might trigger something worse. My legs carried me backward until the edge of the bed hit the backs of my knees. I sat down hard, the springs creaking beneath my weight, my eyes locked on the screen. Couldn't look away. Couldn't force my gaze to shift, even though every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that televisions didn't work this way, that faces didn't appear in static watching you from angles that defied physics. The shapes continued their dance. My face dissolved back into the chaos and other forms emerged. Figures that might have been human, might have been something else entirely. They moved through the static with that same purposeful fluidity, appearing and disappearing, never quite solid enough to identify, but too coherent to dismiss as random noise. 7 minutes, I counted without meaning to. Some part of my brain tracking the seconds, the minutes, the duration of this impossible thing happening in front of me. The towel around my waist grew damp against my skin. Water dripped from my hair down my neck, my shoulders. I didn't move to wipe it away. Just watched. Just sat there on the edge of the bed in room 119, $43 poorer than I'd been yesterday, $1 away from completely broke, and watched shapes move through static on a television I hadn't turned on. At exactly 7 minutes, the screen went black. I needed something normal, something that made sense. The plastic ice bucket sat on the dresser next to the television, white, generic, the kind that's been in every motel room since the 80s. I grabbed it and stepped outside. The night air hit cold against my still damp skin. Should have put on more than just jeans and a t-shirt, but I wasn't thinking straight. My hair dripped water onto my shoulders as I walked down the exterior corridor, bare feet slapping against concrete that held the day's heat underneath a cold surface layer. The ice machine sat at the hallway's end, humming to itself. Old model, the kind with a pull-down door and a push-button dispenser. Someone had stuck a faded out-of-order sign on it at some point, but the sign had been crossed out with black marker and "Works Fine" written below in different handwriting. I positioned the bucket under the dispenser and pressed the button. The green light flickered. On, off, on again, held steady. Nothing happened. I pressed harder, like that would make a difference. The mechanism whirred inside the machine. I could hear it working, gears turning, something moving, but no ice came out. The whirring continued for maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. The green light stayed on. Come on. I hit the button again, same whir, same nothing. I was reaching to press it a third time when the rule surfaced in my memory. Count to 60 before taking ice from the machine. I'd read it maybe an hour ago, sitting on that bed with wet hands from the shower, staring at faded typewriter text on laminated cardboard. Felt foolish even considering it. Standing there in a motel hallway at, I didn't know what time it was, sometime past 2 in the morning probably, counting to 60 so an ice machine would work, like it was some kind of mechanical patience test, like the machine needed time to decide whether I deserved ice. But the television had turned itself on, and my face had stared back at me from static. I started counting. 1, 2, 3. My breath fogged in the cold air. Hadn't noticed how cold it was until I stood still. 15, 16, 17. The ice machine's hum changed pitch slightly. Lower, steadier. 32, 33, 34. Water from my hair ran down the back of my neck. I should have dried off better. Should have grabbed a jacket. Should have stayed in Phoenix and faced whatever was coming instead of running to a $42 room in Barstow with rules typed on a card that couldn't possibly mean anything. 56, 57, 58. The machine's hum rose to something almost like a growl. 59, 60. Ice thundered into the bucket. Not dropped, not dispensed. Thundered. Like someone had opened a chute and dumped 50 pounds of ice from a height, the cubes hammering down with force that made the bucket jump in my hands. Ice overflowed onto the floor, scattering across concrete in every direction, some pieces sliding 5 or 6 feet down the hallway. I yanked the bucket back. Ice kept coming for another 3 seconds, pouring out of the dispenser in a cascade that clattered and bounced and spread across the walkway. Then it stopped. The machine's hum returned to normal. The green light stayed steady. I stood there holding a bucket so full of ice that cubes were sliding off the top, surrounded by maybe 24 more pieces scattered across the ground, and tried to tell myself this was normal, just a mechanical malfunction, pressure buildup in the system. Happened all the time in old equipment. My hands were shaking. I walked back to room 119. Moving carefully to avoid stepping on ice with bare feet, watching the bucket to keep more cubes from spilling over the edges. The bathroom door was closed. I stopped 3 feet from my room, bucket in hand, staring at that door. I'd left it open. stood in front of the foggy mirror while I toweled off, walked out into the bedroom in just the towel, sat on the bed watching impossible static for 7 minutes. The door had been open the entire time. I hadn't touched it since I'd pushed it open in deliberate defiance of the first rule: keep bathroom door closed between 2-4 a.m. The door was closed now, not just pulled to, fully latched, the handle in the locked position. I set the ice bucket on the dresser with movements that felt disconnected from my body. The clock radio next to the television displayed glowing red numbers: 1:47 a.m. 13 minutes until the bathroom door needed to be closed anyway. Maybe I'd closed it without thinking. Muscle memory from 1,000 other motel rooms, 1,000 other bathrooms. Maybe the door had been warped, spring-loaded, designed to close on its own, and I just hadn't noticed when I'd opened it. 3 knocks came from the main door. Slow, deliberate, spaced exactly 3 seconds apart. Knock, 1, 2, 3, knock, 1, 2, 3, knock. My hand was on the handle before my brain caught up. Before I remembered standing in the office at 2:30 in the morning, paying $42, walking to this room with a garbage bag full of everything I owned. Before I remembered sitting on the bed reading 6 rules typed on aged paper, dismissing them as a prank, throwing the card face down onto the mattress. Never answer knocking in sets of 3. Wait for the 4th knock. I froze with my palm pressed against cool metal, feeling my pulse hammer against the inside of my wrist. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but empty parking lot. Gravel. My Honda Civic parked at an angle near the office. Sodium lights casting orange pools across the lot. No one standing at my door. No one anywhere in sight. I stepped back. The knocking came again. Knock. 1, 2, 3, knock. 1, 2, 3, knock. But it wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was coming from inside the bathroom. Same rhythm, same deliberate spacing, same slow, purposeful sound of knuckles against wood. But now it was behind me. Coming from the other side of that closed door I hadn't closed myself. I stood in the middle of room 119 with wet hair and bare feet and $1 in my pocket, listening to something knock from inside my bathroom in sets of 3, while something else knocked the same pattern from outside my door, and I opened neither. I didn't move toward the bathroom. I didn't move toward the main door. I just stood there, frozen in place, while the knocking continued in perfect synchronization from both directions. The knocking stopped at 2:33 a.m. exactly. I stood in the middle of the room with my wet hair dripping down my neck, ice bucket on the dresser, that $1 still in my pocket. The silence hit harder than the noise had. My ears rang with the absence of sound. Then I heard my name. Not Lance. The other one. The one I hadn't used in 3 years. The name on the driver's license I kept buried under expired insurance cards, and a library card from a city I'd never go back to. The name that belonged to someone who hadn't existed since Jenna pressed her fingers into my wrist hard enough to leave permanent marks. The whisper came through the window glass, muffled and distant. From the parking lot, maybe, or somewhere beyond it in the dark sprawl of Barstow at 2:33 in the morning. I didn't move. Couldn't tell if my feet had rooted to the carpet or if some part of my brain still functioned enough to keep me still. The voice had been soft, almost tender, the way someone might wake a person they cared about from a nightmare. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my thighs, felt the damp denim under my palms. The voice came again. Closer this time. Right outside the window, separated from me by glass and those uneven curtains that didn't quite meet in the middle. The same name spoken with the same gentle quality that made my throat close up. I recognized something in the tone, something familiar that I couldn't place, but that made every muscle in my body tense. I should have remembered the rules, should have kept that laminated card in my hand, instead of leaving it face down on the bed where I couldn't see the typed regulations. Rule 5. Only respond to your name being called if the voice comes from inside the room. But I hadn't memorized which rule was which, just knew there were 6 of them, typed on faded paper that had been old when I was born. The third time the voice came. It was directly behind me, inside the room, inside the space where I stood alone with my wet hair and bare feet, and the terror climbing up my spine one vertebra at a time. The voice said my name again, that name, the one I'd buried, and this time I heard the familiarity I'd been trying to place. It was my mother's voice. My mother, who'd been dead for 11 years, who'd called me that name every morning when she woke me for school, every evening when dinner was ready, every time she needed me, and I was somewhere else not paying attention. Yeah? The word came out before I could stop it. Automatic response hardwired into me from 18 years of answering when she called. My mouth moved and sound emerged, and I forgot every single thing the laminated card had told me not to do. The bathroom door slammed open. Not creaked, not swung. Slammed with enough force that it hit the interior wall and the doorknob punched a hole in the drywall. The sound cracked through the room and I stumbled backward, hip catching the edge of the small table, pain shooting through my pelvis. The bathroom light was still off, but I could see everything anyway. The mirror above the sink wasn't a mirror anymore. I'd looked at that mirror when I brushed my teeth after checking in. Standard rectangular piece of glass bolted to the wall above a chipped porcelain sink. Nothing special. Nothing wrong with it except age and water stains along the bottom edge. Now it showed something else entirely. The glass had become a window, or a door, or some third thing that didn't have a name because it shouldn't exist in the same reality as Honda Civics and eviction notices and protein bars from gas stations. I stared into it, couldn't look away even though every survival instinct I had left was screaming at me to run. The space beyond the glass bent wrong, geometry that made my eyes hurt to follow, angles that shouldn't connect but did anyway, folding into themselves and back out again. Walls that curved and straightened simultaneously. A ceiling that was also a floor depending on which direction I focused. And the shadows. They had weight. I could see it in how they moved, heavy and deliberate, pressing against the warped architecture with physical presence. They had intention too, purpose. They weren't just absence of light. They were something else wearing darkness as a skin. In the center of that impossible space stood a man. I knew him immediately, even though I'd never seen him before. He was me. Older. Maybe 20 years older, though the gauntness made it hard to tell. Skin stretched tight over bones that pressed against his face at sharp angles. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes. The same hazel color as mine, but emptied out. Vacant in a way that had nothing to do with tiredness and everything to do with something fundamental being gone. He wore the same wrinkled jeans I had on, same faded t-shirt. His hair was the same dark brown but thinner, receding back from a forehead lined with deep creases. He stood in a corridor that stretched behind him into infinity. Identical motel room doors lined both sides, maroon paint, brass numbers, plastic diamond-shaped keychains hanging from metal keys in every lock. The doors extended back and back and back, growing smaller with perspective but never ending, never reaching a wall or a terminus point. Just more doors, more rooms. Forever. I watched him. He didn't move. Just stood there in that endless hallway with his shoulders slumped and his hands hanging at his sides. Then I saw the others. Behind him, through the open doorways of those infinite motel rooms, each one contained another version of me, different ages, different stages. One looked barely 20, sitting on a bed edge with his face in his hands. Another stood at a window with his palm pressed against glass. A third lay curled on threadbare carpet. A fourth paced the narrow space between bed and dresser. 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. Endless repetition. They were all me, every single one. And they were all answering. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw their mouths move. Saw them turn toward something I couldn't see in their individual rooms. Saw them respond to voices that had called names they shouldn't have acknowledged. The version of me in the corridor, the starved one, the oldest one, finally moved. His head turned slowly until he was looking directly at me, through the impossible mirror, through the bathroom doorway, across the 12 feet of room 119 that separated me from the glass. His mouth opened. I heard my mother's voice come out, not from him, from behind me again, from inside the room where I stood frozen with my hip throbbing and my hands shaking and my wet hair still dripping water down my spine. She said my name one more time, the name I'd buried, the name I'd stopped being. The starved version of me in the corridor smiled. His teeth were gray. His gums had receded, but the expression was unmistakable. Recognition. Welcome. He raised one skeletal hand and gestured toward the nearest door in that endless hallway. The number on it read 119. All the other versions of me in all those infinite rooms turned to look at me simultaneously. Every face, every age, every stage of degradation and despair. They stared through their doorways with empty eyes that had once been hazel, had once belonged to someone named Lance Blair, who drove a Honda Civic and had $43 and a future that existed somewhere beyond Barstow. The shadows with weight and intention began moving toward the mirror's surface, toward the barrier between that bent space and this room, toward me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stand there watching myself, watching all my selves, stare back at me from rooms they'd never left and never would. The bathroom door was still open. The mirror was still a window. My mother's voice was still calling my name, and I'd already answered. The starved version of myself in the corridor moved, not toward the door it had gestured at, toward me. Its hand lifted from its side, skeletal fingers extending, and the surface of the mirror rippled where those fingers touched it. The glass bent inward, then gave way completely. That hand pushed through into room 119, emerging from the impossible geometry on the other side, reaching across the space between the bathroom doorway and where I stood frozen near the bed. The fingers closed around my left wrist. The cold hit first. Not the chill of ice or winter air, something deeper, the kind of cold that exists in places where warmth has never been, where the concept doesn't translate. It burned through my skin and wrapped around the bones underneath, spreading up my forearm toward my elbow with methodical certainty. The grip tightened. I felt each individual finger press into my flesh with crushing force. The thumb settled across my pulse point. The other 4 fingers dug into the opposite side, finding purchase in the exact spaces between tendons and veins. The pressure built until I couldn't tell if the sound I heard was my own heartbeat or something pulsing in that hand itself. My breath came out in a visible cloud despite the room's stale warmth. The starved version's face remained visible through the mirror, still wearing that gray-toothed smile, its hollow eyes locked on mine. Behind it, all those infinite versions of myself continued staring from their identical rooms, watching this happen with expressions I couldn't read. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. The hand pulled, not hard, not violent, just steady, inexorable pressure drawing me toward the bathroom, toward that rippling mirror surface where the impossible corridor waited on the other side. My feet moved across the carpet without my permission. One step, then another. The wet ends of my hair dripped cold water down my neck. My free hand reached out automatically, grasping at nothing, finding no purchase in empty air. I was 3 feet from the bathroom doorway when my brain finally started working again. The rules. I'd violated the rules by answering when the voice called my name from inside the room. This was the consequence, being taken into whatever existed on the other side of that mirror, into that corridor, with infinite doors and infinite versions of myself who'd made the same mistakes, who'd answered the same voices, who'd ended up trapped in rooms they never left. The starved version would pull me through. I'd become another figure standing in another doorway, staring out at the next person stupid enough to break the rules in room 119. The cycle would continue. The rooms would multiply. The corridor would extend further into that impossible geometry where angles didn't connect right and shadows had weight and intention. 2 feet from the doorway, the cold from that grip had spread past my elbow now, creeping toward my shoulder with patient inevitability. My left arm had gone completely numb below the point where those fingers dug in. I couldn't feel my hand anymore, couldn't tell if I was making a fist or if my fingers hung limp. My right hand swung out again, desperate, and connected with the edge of the nightstand. The impact sent a jolt through my hip. I'd already hit that spot on the table earlier, and the bruise there flared with fresh pain. But my fingers found the nightstand's surface, scrabbling across cheap laminate, knocking aside the reading lamp. The bulb flickered. My palm slapped down on something solid, the Gideon Bible. I'd noticed it earlier when I first found the laminated card, positioned deliberately on the nightstand like the card itself had been. Standard issue for motel rooms across the country. Black faux leather cover, thin pages, probably hadn't been opened in years. My fingers closed around it. 1 foot from the doorway, close enough now to see the bathroom tile through the open door, to see the mirror's surface still rippling where that arm extended through it, connecting the starved version of myself to my wrist with unbreakable intention. I twisted my torso, pulling against that grip with everything I had, and swung the Bible at the mirror. The book connected with the glass dead center, right where the rippling surface met solid mirror. I'd put my full weight behind it, all the strength from 16 hours of white-knuckling a steering wheel, all the desperation of someone with $1 left and 72 hours until repossession, all the terror of watching myself reach through impossible geometry to drag me into a corridor I'd never escape. The mirror exploded, not cracked, not spiderwebbed. It detonated outward in a spray of fragments that caught the overhead light and threw it back in 1,000 directions. Shards hit the tile floor with sounds that reminded me of wind chimes, of breaking bottles, of something musical and wrong. Larger pieces struck the toilet tank and shattered further. The smallest fragments turned to powder that hung suspended in the air for a moment before settling. The hand around my wrist dissolved. I felt it happen in stages. First, the pressure released, those crushing fingers loosening their grip. Then the cold began to recede, pulling back down my arm toward my wrist, concentrating in the exact points where each finger had pressed into my flesh. Finally, the physical presence itself disappeared. No gradual fading, just instant absence. Solid grip to nothing between one heartbeat and the next. I stumbled backward, my momentum carrying me away from the bathroom doorway now that nothing held me in place. My shoulder blades hit the wall next to the dresser. The Bible slipped from my right hand and landed on the carpet with a muffled thump. The bathroom mirror was just a mirror again, or what remained of one. The frame still hung on the wall above the sink, but only a few jagged pieces of glass clung to the edges. The rest lay scattered across the tile floor in fragments ranging from palm-sized chunks to glittering powder. No impossible geometry, no infinite corridor, no starved version of myself staring back with hollow eyes and gray teeth. Just broken glass reflecting broken light. My left arm hung at my side, still numb from the cold that had spread through it. Sensation was returning slowly, pins and needles starting at my fingertips and working upward. I raised my wrist with my right hand, lifting it to eye level where the overhead light would hit it directly. 5 marks, perfect circles, dark purple already deepening toward black. 4 on one side of my wrist, 1 on the other where the thumb had pressed down. Each mark showed the distinct whorls and ridges of a fingerprint, pressed into my skin with such force that I could see the individual lines in the pattern. I knew without understanding how I knew, without any logical reason to believe it, that these marks would never fade, not in days, not in weeks, not in the years that would follow. They'd remain exactly as dark, exactly as clear, exactly as permanent as the moment they'd been made. 5 fingerprints burned into my flesh by something that had reached through from the other side, something that had almost dragged me into a corridor I'd never escape. Evidence, proof, a brand marking me as someone who'd violated the rules and survived the consequences by the thinnest margin. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall until I sat on the carpet with my back against the wallpaper, knees drawn up, left wrist cradled against my chest. The overhead light hummed. The bathroom door remained open, still showing the damage where the doorknob had punched through the drywall earlier. Glass covered the tile floor in a carpet of fragments that threw back reflections of the empty room. I'd broken the rules. Rule number something. I couldn't remember the exact number now, couldn't recall the precise wording from that laminated card still lying face down on the bed. Only respond to your name being called if the voice comes from inside the room. Something along those lines. I'd answered when my mother's voice had called my real name from behind me, the name I hadn't used in 3 years, the name associated with someone who stopped existing when Jenna left the first set of marks on this same wrist. The bathroom door had slammed open. The mirror had shown me what waited on the other side. Infinite versions of myself who'd made similar mistakes, who'd violated similar rules, who'd been taken into rooms they never left. The starved version in the corridor had reached through to collect me, to add me to that multiplication of failures extending backward into impossible space. I'd grabbed the Bible, swung it, shattered the mirror, broken the connection before it could pull me all the way through. Barely survived. The phrase kept repeating in my head as I sat there surrounded by broken glass, my wet hair finally starting to dry, my bare feet cold against the carpet, my left wrist throbbing as feeling returned and brought pain with it. Those 5 marks stood out against my pale skin, dark and permanent, a reminder that something from the other side had touched me and left its signature behind. I'd almost been taken. Almost joined those infinite versions of myself standing in infinite doorways, staring out at the next person stupid enough to answer when the wrong voice called their name. The marks would never let me forget. I sat against that wall until the sky started turning gray outside the window. Didn't move except to breathe. My left wrist throbbed where the 5 marks had settled into my skin, dark purple circles that looked almost black in the weak light filtering through the curtains. The bathroom door stood open. Glass covered the tile floor in fragments, some big as my palm, others ground down to powder that caught what little light came through. The mirror frame hung empty on the wall above the sink, just the frame and a few jagged pieces clinging to the edges. My legs had gone numb from sitting. When I finally pushed myself up, pins and needles shot through my calves and thighs. I grabbed the dresser edge for balance, waited for the sensation to return. The ice bucket sat where I'd left it. Water pooled around the base where the ice had melted completely. The laminated card lay face down on the bed, red management stamp visible. I'd read those rules 3 times when I first found them. Dismissed them as a prank. Broke at least 2 of them deliberately. I picked up the card with my right hand. My left arm still felt wrong, cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The bruises had already settled into permanent marks. I knew that without understanding how. Same way I knew what I'd seen in that mirror was real. The card went back on the nightstand, exactly where it had been positioned between the lamp and the Bible. The Bible lay on the floor where it had fallen after I'd used it to smash the mirror. I left it there. Dawn came through the curtains in bands of pale orange and yellow. The parking lot outside looked normal. My Honda Civic sat where I'd parked it, 3rd spot from the office. No other cars visible from this angle. I needed to leave. The thought arrived fully formed. Not a decision I made, just a fact my body understood before my brain caught up. I needed to get out of this room, away from the empty mirror frame and the glass on the bathroom floor and the laminated card with its rules I should have followed. My garbage bag sat by the door where I'd dropped it when I first entered. How many hours ago? 6? 7? Felt longer. The bag contained everything I'd brought from Phoenix. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear, socks, toothbrush and deodorant shoved in the side pocket. My entire life reduced to what fit in one black plastic bag. I left it there, didn't even think about it. Just turned away from the bag and grabbed my keys from the dresser. The metal key for room 119 lay next to them on the cheap laminate surface. I left that too. My shoes sat by the bed, where I'd kicked them off. I shoved my bare feet into them without bothering with the laces. My shirt was wrinkled from being worn for 20 hours straight. Didn't matter. Nothing in that room mattered, except getting out. I unlocked the chain, threw the deadbolt, pulled the door open. The air outside hit my face, cold and clean, smelling of desert sand and distant exhaust from the highway. I stepped onto the concrete walkway. The door swung shut behind me with a click that sounded too final. Scattered ice still littered the walkway from when the machine had erupted. Most of it had melted, but a few pieces remained in the shadows where the sunrise hadn't reached yet. I stepped over them, walking fast toward my car. The office window glowed yellow. Someone moved inside, probably the same heavy-set clerk who'd checked me in. I didn't look directly at the window, didn't want to know if he was watching. My car door opened with its familiar squeak. I dropped into the driver's seat, shoved the key into the ignition. The engine turned over on the second try, settling into its rough idle. 71 hours now until repossession. Vincent from Cascade Recovery would be calling the disconnected number again soon. Didn't matter. None of it mattered. I reversed out of the parking spot too fast, tires crunching on gravel. Put it in drive and pulled toward the exit without looking back at room 119. The highway stretched ahead in both directions, empty at this hour except for a semi in the distance heading west. I turned east, away from Barstow. Didn't have a destination, just needed distance between me and that motel. The bruises on my wrist burned, not painful exactly, more like awareness, a constant reminder of fingers that had gripped hard enough to leave permanent marks. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, pulling my sleeve down to cover them. Didn't help. Could still feel each individual fingerprint pressed into my skin. 5 marks, 4 fingers and a thumb. The same pattern I'd had before, the ones Jenna had left 3 years ago when she'd grabbed my wrist during our last fight. Those had faded eventually, taking 18 months to disappear completely. These wouldn't fade. I knew that the same way I knew my real name, even though I hadn't used it in years. The same way I'd known my mother's voice despite her being dead for 11 years. Some knowledge doesn't come from thinking. It just arrives fully formed and absolute. The highway stretched ahead. Dawn turned the desert pink and orange, long shadows reaching across the sand. I pushed the accelerator down, watching the speedometer climb. 60, 70, 75. The gas gauge showed a quarter tank. Wouldn't get me far. I had $1 in my pocket. Not enough for fuel, food, water. Nothing. I kept driving anyway. Miles passed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the dawn colors and turning the sky that washed-out blue it gets in the desert. Heat started building even this early. The car's air conditioning had died 2 months ago in Phoenix. I rolled down the window instead, letting hot air blast through the cabin. My left wrist throbbed in time with my pulse. I glanced down at it. The sleeve had ridden up, exposing the marks. Dark purple, almost black. Each one showing the distinct whorls and ridges of a fingerprint, like someone had dipped their fingers in ink and pressed them into my skin with enough force to make the pattern permanent. I pulled the sleeve back down. Didn't look at them again. The highway sign said 20 miles to Ludlow. Another dying desert town with a gas station and maybe a diner. I wouldn't stop there. Wouldn't stop anywhere until the car ran out of fuel or I crossed state lines or something in my head settled enough to think clearly. That could take days, weeks, might never happen. I'd left everything behind. The garbage bag with my clothes, the toiletries, the 2 other shirts I'd packed when I fled Phoenix. All of it sitting in room 109 next to the empty mirror frame and the glass on the bathroom floor. Didn't matter. None of it had mattered even when I'd thought it did. Just objects. Replaceable. The only thing I'd brought out of that room was the 5 marks on my wrist and the knowledge that I'd seen something impossible, and survived it by the thinnest margin. The speedometer crept up to 80. The engine rattled at this speed. Transmission whining. The car wouldn't last much longer. Vincent would get it soon enough, tow it from wherever it finally died and auction it off to cover part of what I owed. Numbers on a spreadsheet. Debt that would follow me for years. Still didn't matter. What mattered was the Motel 6 still standing behind me in Barstow, still operating, rooms still available for $42 a night, the heavyset clerk still sitting behind the counter watching infomercials. Room 119 still at the far end of the building with its sticky lock and maroon comforter and nightstand positioned just so, the laminated card still waiting there. 4 inches by 6 inches, faded typewriter font, 6 numbered rules that seemed absurd until you broke them. I could picture it exactly. The card sitting between the reading lamp and the Gideon Bible, positioned deliberately where anyone checking into that room would see it. The next desperate traveler who paid cash and gave a fake license plate number. The next person running from something with nowhere else to go and $42 in their pocket. They'd read those rules. Maybe laugh at them the way I had. Maybe dismiss them as a prank or a joke or some weird motel tradition. Maybe they'd follow the rules, keep the bathroom door closed, watch the television if it turned on by itself, count to 60 before taking ice. Or maybe they'd ignore them, leave the bathroom door open out of defiance or forgetfulness, answer when a familiar voice called their name from inside the room. I didn't know which would be worse. The highway curved slightly, following the contour of distant mountains. My hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles white. The left wrist throbbed. 5 permanent fingerprints marking where something from the other side had reached through and grabbed me, where I'd been pulled toward that impossible corridor with infinite doors and infinite versions of myself trapped in rooms they never left. I'd gotten out, barely, by blind luck and desperation, and a Bible I'd grabbed without thinking. The next person might not be that lucky. The gas gauge dropped toward empty. Didn't matter. I kept driving, putting miles between me and Barstow, carrying nothing but the clothes I wore and the marks I'd earned and the certainty that somewhere behind me, room 119 sat waiting with its laminated card positioned exactly where the next desperate fool would find it.